Welcome to Pivot Points, a new series featuring some of the world's most successful women, candidly sharing their stories and insights about how they made it to the top and how you can too. Hosted by Perry Yeatman, a straight-talking global executive and award-winning author who created the career and life of her dreams and now wants to help other ambitious women do the same.
Welcome. This is Perry Yeatman, host of Pivot Points. I first met our next guest more than a decade ago when I was the president of the Kraft Foods Foundation. We were considering a partnership with her organization, a partnership that I am happy to say has since taken root and is making such a difference for smallholder cocoa farmers in Ghana. I had met a lot of NGO leaders by the time we were introduced, but she stood out immediately, striking me as both deeply mission-driven and totally business-savvy, which, by the way, is a pretty rare combination. In the years since that first meeting, I have learned my instincts were absolutely right, so it was no surprise to me that last year Fortune magazine named her as one of the 50 world's greatest leaders. And that's from everywhere, so that is a really impressive accolade. Certainly, she has used those gifts well, advocating for the neediest children around the world and here in the U.S. Under her leadership, the organization has mobilized nearly $700 million in resources to help children in need. And in just 5 years, she has more than doubled the number of children they reach. In preparing for this interview, I learned that not only do we share a passion for children and for women and girls, but we've also both lived and worked in Asia and are proud Wahoos. That's also known as graduates of the University of Virginia, for those of you who didn't know. Her name, if you haven't already guessed, is Carolyn Miles. She's the president and CEO of Save the Children, one of the largest, most trusted and respected INGOs in the world. And I'm just delighted she could make time to be with us today. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you, Perry. It's great to be here.
We know where you are today, but the question is, every journey had to start somewhere. So could you share with listeners, what was the job or the opportunity that really launched you, and how did you get it?
Sure. Well, I think the pivotal job probably for me was after business school at University of Virginia, so at the Darden School. I started working for American Express in New York, and they had a program where they picked 5 people to go to an international post, and they didn't tell you where you were going to go. They just said, were you interested in this program? And it was a prestigious program. And so I had just been married about a year. So I went home, said to my husband, do you want to go somewhere? And he said, like where? And I said, I don't know. And it ended up that we ended up in Hong Kong. And for me, that was, first of all, it was a fantastic opportunity to live in a fantastic city, so that was great. It was a great job. It was launching actually the first frequent flyer program in Asia for American Express, so that was a great opportunity to work with airlines and hotels and to do all sorts of exciting things. And it also gave me a chance to travel a lot in Asia, and we actually had 2 of our 3 children while we were there. And that was probably the experience that actually turned my life towards the work that Save the Children does, because I experienced and saw really dramatic poverty, and a lot of our travels were with our kids, and so I also saw how different the world was for children versus my own children, and the opportunities that these kids had were so different from my kids. And so that's really what got me on the path towards working in the nonprofit world and working ultimately for Save the Children.
Thank you for sharing that. And I will tell you that, I had a similar experience of being in Asia and then Russia and continuing to move around the world. And it was life-changing. So I totally support women doing exactly what you did, which is you raised your hand. I mean, it sounds like it wasn't that they had picked you beforehand. They made you aware of a possible opportunity and you took the risk and you raised your hand. Would that be accurate in terms of how this went down?
Well, it was a combination of both. They picked people that they wanted to go into this program, and then you had to decide where you're going to take them up on that. And so it was a program for high performers, but it was really, I think, taking a pretty big leap because I didn't know where I was going, And I really didn't, and they didn't really promise you a specific job. They just said, this is an opportunity to get this international experience. And we think you're somebody that would really benefit from doing it. And do you want to do it?
Great.
And so
then it was a two-step process. First, you delivered.
Yeah,
and second,
exactly.
You raised your hand when the risk and opportunity came. You've actually already touched on one of the single most important things all of my guests have shared, which is that picking the right partner is probably one of the most important decisions you could ever make. And you just said it there, right? Because you came home and you said, honey, how about an overseas assignment? And you couldn't even tell him where. And he also, in essence, raised his hand because he said, sure, I'll go with you. So can you tell us a little bit about, and then you said, you have 3 kids. Tell us a little bit about how have you managed to, work-life balance, I think, is a misnomer, but how have you managed the obvious stresses and trade-offs that are required in order to have a working family life and a busy, advancing career?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I'm not a believer in that work-life balance thing actually either. I think it's more about different times in your life, different things kind of bubble up or really take prominence and importance, and other times other things do. And I'm really lucky because my husband is, I think, we are of the same mindset that, things like international experience would be really important for us and for our children. And so, I think I didn't know actually I was having our first child till about a week before we left to go to Hong Kong.
So that was a surprise.
But it turned out to be great, and he really was extremely supportive, and ended up finding a job in financial services, which is what he was doing in New York before, in Hong Kong. After a while. But, I think the way we look at it is there's different, as I said, it's different balances between your life at different times. Mm-hmm. And, when we came back from our overseas post, we came back with his job. So we went with my job. We came back with his job. And I was doing some, consulting when we first came back and at home with the kids, a much bigger chunk of the time. Mm-hmm. So, it's if I think about it over the past 25 years, it's been at different times, one of our careers or the other has taken precedence, and it's been on both sides. And I think that's what's made it work for us.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. So in order to make that happen, obviously there's a lot of negotiation that has to happen because you went out, as you said, for your job, you were with a company. When you came back, had you left American Express? Like, what was that transition? And as you're thinking about all these transitions that you've made and how you navigated and negotiated them, what would you share with listeners as some of your your best advice on how to negotiate fairly and to get what you deserve?
Yeah, so I made a transition actually while we were in Hong Kong. So I worked for American Express for about 3 years, and I was originally we were only supposed to be there for 18 months. So we decided, we really liked it, and American Express decided they liked me, and so I ended up working with them for 3 years. But then I had my second child, and I had a regional job, so I was traveling all over the place, and I had these 2 little kids. Like a 2.5-year-old and an infant. And my husband was traveling somewhat, not quite as much. And I just said, this is a little bit crazy. So a friend of mine, actually from business school, another connection from business school, said he had started a coffee shop. And he wanted to start a chain of coffee shops in Hong Kong. And he said, why don't you come and do this with me? And I thought, this will be great. I'll get to stay home more, and my hours will be better, and I won't be flying all over the place. Well, startup businesses are not are not known for like good hours. So, but the good thing was I could drag my kids with me, and we would, go open the coffee shop at 6 a.m. or go work on the fit out of the new store or, whatever it was. And by the time I left a couple of years later, we had 24 locations.
Wow.
So it was a very rapid, and it still exists. It's all over Asia. We sold it to a Chinese investor. But, that change for me, again, it was another example of, it wasn't, I didn't feel like I was with my kids enough at that point in my career, and this opportunity came along, and it was with somebody I knew well and really liked working with, and said, okay, let's try. I think a lot of it is you got to try things. I would say that, if I think about my career, the kind of, let's just try that. And if it doesn't work, you can always do something else, right? If it doesn't work, you can always say, okay, I tried that and it didn't work. And typically my experience has been that's when you learn the most, when you decide you're going to try something new and make a change. And that, I think, worked really well in terms of, for me. And then when we came back, again, it was my husband's job, and it was also family. We had been in Hong Kong for 5 years, and you get to that point where you're either going to stay as an expat for a long time, or you're probably going to come back to the U.S. And we decided it was a long way from family. It's a very long trip, and with little kids especially. And so we said, I think the 5 years was great, and he had the opportunity to come back to New York. And so we said, okay, now's the time to do that. So we did. And at that point, I really had already done some volunteer work in Hong Kong. And as I said, this issue of poverty was really, I think, hitting me hard, especially having kids. I think it really strikes you in a much different way. And I had decided I really wanted to do nonprofit work when I got back. So, spent a lot of time looking and finding the right place, and was, fantastic opportunity at Save the Children. So that was great.
And was Save the Children your first nonprofit? Did you go straight in?
Yeah.
And did you go straight in as the COO? Is that where you actually landed first?
No. I did go. It was my first and only nonprofit experience.
Okay.
So I never worked for a nonprofit. I'd done some volunteer work, as I said, but that was it. Never worked for a nonprofit. And I came in, though, in a middle management position, and it was using a lot of the same skills that I had done at both American Express and Pacific Coffee Company. Actually, it was marketing, basically. It was bringing in new donors into Save the Children. So it was direct mail. It was the beginnings of the internet. So we had just started doing we had like a page that sat up there and did nothing. That was our internet. But I had done some of that work at American Express, television, advertising. So it was marketing to bring in new donors into Save. That was my first job.
Well, that probably explains why you're so good at raising money.
Right.
And, it's funny. I always tell people, it's like if there's a great first job, it is sales, right? Because and people laugh because I had made a bet with my dad that basically within 3 months of graduation as a lit major with no skills whatsoever, that I was going to have a professional job. And in the meantime, I sold knives, cutlery, door to door.
Yeah,
and
there you go.
And I tell people exactly. I said, they're like, how did you ever have the guts to do all these things you've done? And I said, once you have knocked on strangers' doors and tried to sell them knives, trust me, you can do anything.
Yeah. So my first job out of college, before I went to business school, I was in sales.
Yep.
And I actually sold train car loads of chemicals. So I was working for a company called FMC out of Chicago. And it was in their industrial chemicals division because I had a chemistry degree. And so that was the first thing I did. But as you said, sales is definitely a hugely important and useful skill to have.
Couldn't agree more. And thinking on your feet, boy, you just have to learn how to do it.
Right.
We talked about how you started. We talked about how you navigated through the child and caregiving period. Not that ever ends, but nonetheless. And some of the transitions. Now that you're at the executive level, we often hear that it's lonely at the top, and even more so for women because, frankly, there just aren't that many of us. So what is your support system? How did you create it, and how have you found time to maintain it?
Yeah, so I would say it's a combination of friends, both older and newer, and then I have a very important mentor who is the chair of our board, Ann Mulcahy, who used to be the CEO of Xerox, is the chair of our board, and she's been a fantastic mentor since I've been the CEO. She's been the board chair for the last 5-6 years. And then the other piece is really about, I have a very close set of 5 girlfriends from college who we have stayed very close, and we get together every single year, and we talk a lot in between. And then I have another group of 5 girlfriends that is from Connecticut, where I live. And they're both similar in that you can go kind of months with, not seeing them or not even talking to them. And then when you get back together, it's kind of as if you didn't ever, it's as if you saw them yesterday. Mm-hmm. So you just get to know each other really well, and I think, have a lot of shared experiences, and a lot of, what brought me together with my friends from Connecticut is kids. A lot of them had my first child and their first child, or one of their kids were, in school together, and we all met when they were like 4. Mm-hmm. And so just been friends ever since then. And so I think it's really important to have that. And it's a group of people, especially for me now, because I travel so much, that, they're okay with, well, when are you going to be home? And, okay, it's on this day, then we're going to get together on that day. And, it might be 2 months from now, but that's fine. Mm-hmm. And so just a really, close, supportive group, and I can call any of them about anything if I need help, with the kids or something, and you just know you can call them anytime for anything. So.
Well, I couldn't agree. I could never have done it without girlfriends. I couldn't agree with you. And I have guy friends too, but it is truly my girlfriends who get me through the really, really tough stuff in general. Yep. How did you? So it sounded to me like one of the things you did was you prioritized. So you made it a commitment. You made it a priority that you were going to not only have those relationships but maintain them. Yep. Was there anything else? Like, did you multitask in order to find the time? Meaning, like, some people get together with their girlfriends and they say, okay, we're going to exercise together. So we're doing 2 things at once, or we're going to walk the dog or take the kids somewhere or whatever.
Yeah, so I have a couple friends that I walk with, so that's part, it is about that multitasking.
One other question. Did you all decide, how did you handle the trade-offs in terms of the caregiving of the kids? Did you guys have help? I've had a lot of guests who said, look, don't feel guilty about it. You need to build a team at home the way you build a team at the office, and just, trust that everything is going to work out. Did you do that, or did you and your husband really handle all of the home and caregiving responsibilities just between the 2 of you?
No, we did not, and and I would never have been able to do what I have done unless we had somebody at home. So I have a wonderful, fantastic lady who came back with us from Hong Kong, who is Filipino. Her name is Nita, and she came back with us about 20 years ago, about 18 years ago, and she met an American guy and got married, and now has her own daughter and lives in the same hometown where I live. And
how wonderful!
Been with us for almost 22 years.
Okay,
so
well,
I could never have done that, and she knows my kids, now incredibly well. 2 of them are out of the house and grown up, and there's only one that's still at home. But she has been a complete lifesaver for us, because I don't think we ever could have. We either would have killed each other or or something. It wouldn't have worked. So I'm sure it wouldn't work.
And the only reason I draw that point out is because I know there are so many young women who are sitting there with kids. I got a note from one of them today, and she's like, thank you for sharing real stories, because I thought it was just me that couldn't make it work. And I thought, every single person I've interviewed who has had children has said, or had to do the caregiving for their elder parents. It's like, it is hard. There's no other word for it. It's hard. And basically everybody says you've got to figure out how you're going to get help for whatever parts you can't or don't want to do. Because whether it's paid or unpaid, nanny, daycare, whatever it is, no woman actually can do all of this unless you're one of those very rare people who I have yet to interview that had a stay-at-home dad
who we all have yet
everything.
to meet.
Right, exactly. That woman doesn't exist.
It's possible. And when my kids were little, because I have traveled, in all my work with, American Express, and then, certainly with Save the Children, I traveled a lot. I would have my mom or my mother-in-law come if I was going to be away for more than a couple days when the kids were little, even, as an additional help for my helper, because it's too much even for one person to even do if that's all they're doing when kids are little. And it was great actually for their grandmothers to come and spend time with them, and I wasn't around and my husband would be at work all day, and it was great for them to come and be with the kids and see them as they grew up and spend time with them. So we would just trade off between the two grandmothers, and one would come on the one trip and then another one would come on the next trip. And so it's been great. They actually told me the other day, my mother was saying to me, I just really miss coming because I used to come, every other month I would be at your house. And it's like, yeah, and now they're too big. They're not here. So.
Right, exactly. You can come, but they'll be gone. Right,
they'll be gone, but they won't be here. Exactly.
Well, I agree. It actually sounds like a real win-win. So let me ask you, if you were to sum up your professional path so far in one word, I know it's not easy, but what word would it be if you thought of one thing that really kind of summarized or encapsulated?
Yeah, I have to say it's probably two words: take chances. That's what I would say.
Good.
Take chances.
Good.
Because I think if you don't, and if I had not, if I hadn't taken the chance to go to Hong Kong, if I hadn't taken the chance to leave Amex and go work for the coffee company, if I hadn't taken the chance to move from the corporate sector to the nonprofit sector, I just think, I would not take the safe path, I guess is what I would say.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. I think that everything in my life, I always kind of said, well, you know me, go big or go home. And,
exactly.
Nothing ventured, nothing gained. So it's like, if there's something you want, you just got to go for it and just assume that even if it doesn't work out, that you will be able to survive whatever the repercussions of it not working out are.
Yeah. And I think that's the difference that I see now with young women who are in the early parts of their careers. I think sometimes they're just they play it too safe, or they think they have to have it all figured out. Mm-hmm. And I guess what I would say is, you don't have to have it all figured out. And sometimes you're going to learn the most when you take those chances. And maybe it doesn't work out. Maybe there's something that you do that it's like, oof, that really wasn't, a good idea. But we'll have learned something, and you can, change your path. Mm-hmm. And I think you got to do that.
I agree. And I'd also say that I don't think, not only do they not have to have it all figured out, none of us actually have it all figured out, right? Because some part of your life is always not figured out, right? It's like, if you're in your job a few years, you can get the hang of your job. But as you know, the market environment changes really fast, or the organization changes, or the CEO changes, so that whole thing is going on. Or part of your life, is settled, but the other part is chaotic. And so I think everybody needs to understand that truly, in fact, being settled in general is not the feeling of an exciting life, right? I'm not saying you have to feel chaotic all the time, but it is people who actually, if you get excited by change, you are already so far ahead of everybody else in terms of being able to have an amazing life and career. So just follow that and accept and embrace all the change that comes.
Yeah, and I find I'm much more productive too when I'm crazy busy, because you have to figure out, okay, how am I going to actually get that stuff done, or what am I going to not do? And I think you make better choices sometimes.
I do. I'm so glad you're the same.
You can't do it all, right? So you say, well, you know what? That one's not going to happen.
Yep. So. And it's also one of those things, if I have 3 things on my plate that day, I'm not really motivated to get it all done. If I have 23 things on my plate that day, it's all done. And I'm like, well, I don't know what kind of mind game goes on in my head, but I'm like, seriously, I need to be overwhelmed in order to be highly productive. It's good.
Yeah, I think it just forces you to, get on with it. So.
Yep. So you've already achieved so much. What is it that keeps you, I bet I know this because you're so mission driven, but what is it that keeps you motivated at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it really is the work that Save the Children does on the ground. I did just get back from Jordan literally this morning, and we were there visiting I took a couple of board members, and we went to visit our programs for Syrian refugee kids. Mm. And there's a giant refugee camp there called Zatari, and then we visited there, and we also visited some of the surrounding communities where refugees are living. And the stories that you hear are just so. We met a woman yesterday who was she was 32. She had 6 children. I think the oldest was about 12. She had been married when she was 17. Mm. And she was telling us the story of how, she had they'd left Syria because of the civil war there, and they'd come to Jordan and walked across the border and gone to this camp and lived there, and then they had found, they'd left the camp because they said, we want to get our kids to have a little bit of a better life, so they left the camp and found a place to live, and they found a couple of jobs to do, and then about a year ago, so it was a couple of years ago, she sent her 9-year-old, so it was her oldest girl, she sent to Sweden with another family because they had other family in Sweden and they wanted her to establish residency in Sweden, and then eventually the family would be able to go to Sweden. But this woman was so driven by everything she did was about, I can make a better life for my kids, mm-hmm. right? Everything she did. And it was just, you realize how much sacrifice these families from Syria are making for their children. And it's just really inspiring and amazing. So when I go meeting the kids, meeting people like this woman and understanding what their lives are like, it makes it all, the programs that Save the Children does for kindergartens in the camps and, women economic empowerment programs that we're doing for Syrian women and getting kids that have been out of school back into school. It just, if you can do a little bit for these families that are doing so much themselves, it really is inspiring, I think.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. In fact, it's both inspiring and complete. I mean, they are so inspiring, and yet for me, the heavy-heartedness of just thinking how many millions. I mean, it was a statistic that you guys shared recently about, what is it, like 65 million people are currently living.
Million. Yeah.
Right, currently living in some form of refugee or in a refugee-type existence. And something like the average stay is, 18 years or something? So it's like we have an entire, I tell this to all of the people that I meet, it's like, you have to understand, we have an entire population of kids who are going to spend their entire childhood in a refugee camp. Millions and millions of them. And the implications of that are huge. Changing gears slightly, because that's a very big idea, and now I want to go to something slightly less big, but could have been big at the moment in your life, which is every successful woman I know has at some point either had a bad break or a big failure or been on the receiving end of some really unacceptable behavior. Since it clearly didn't stop you in rising to the top, would you be willing to share with listeners one of the most difficult or outrageous things that happened to you, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, so actually it was very early in my career at Save the Children. So when I came to Save, there had been, I did not know this when I interviewed for the job, but there was an expose that was being written about Save the Children and a bunch of other nonprofit organizations like ours. That was basically, it was in the Chicago Tribune, and it was a scathing article about basically the disconnect between the marketing of what people were saying, was Save the Children was using money for, and what Save the Children was actually using the money for. And it wasn't that the money was being used for a bad thing, it just wasn't connected to the things that people were using in the marketing materials. So this article came out about a month after I joined Save the Children. And it had a direct impact on my area of work. And so it was, one of those, you think to yourself, did I just make like a major mistake, right, of joining this organization or not? But it turned out to be the best thing that could have ever happened to me in terms of my career at Save, because it forced me to go out to the field and really look at the programs and understand what we were doing and look at what we were saying in our marketing materials and rehaul this whole team of people and develop a whole new set of people to do the interface between the field offices and the programs that we were doing out in the field and what the marketing people were saying. And it wasn't that the money was like, being misused or anything like that. It just wasn't connected to what the marketing people were saying.
So this is a little fun. This is a different type of question. But I was just curious, if you could have a superpower roundtable, lunch, cocktails, whatever you prefer, with 3 women, alive or not, who would they be and why?
Oh, gosh. Oh. Okay, so the first one would probably be the founder of Save the Children, who was a woman, who was a British woman who founded the organization in 1919, so almost 100 years ago. And she founded the organization on this basic premise that children had rights. So I would love to talk to her, because that was way ahead. She couldn't vote, she couldn't drive a car, she couldn't own a bank account. Like, she had virtually no rights, but she had this idea that children had rights.
And what was her name?
Eglantine Jebb.
And you're right.
I've great name.
Never heard of her. I'm thinking Julia Gordon-Low of the Girl Scouts, whatever. But I've never heard of this woman. And clearly, you're right. Yep. She was a brilliant thinker. Okay, so that's number one.
So that would be number one. Number 2 would probably be. I'm trying to think of who, with her. I'd love to have, and I just met with her out on the West Coast, but I'd love to have Sheryl Sandberg there, because I think it would be interesting to have her talking about her ideas about Lean In and about women with this, with Eglantine Jebb there. I think the 2 of them. And me, that would be it. I think the 3 of us, that would be my dream lunch.
All right. I like that. Okay. Well, I'm sorry that's probably not going to happen, but nonetheless.
No, it's not going to happen. But if I could do it, that's what I would do. Okay. Teletransporter here.
Exactly.
We do that.
Well, we're working on that. I'm sure tech is going to get there someday, so maybe.
That's right. Maybe Facebook will figure that out.
Exactly, before we both retire. So we're getting to the last question. I just wanted to ask you, and I'm going to ask you with a little bit with a slant, because you are our first NGO leader, nonprofit leader on the program. And so I'd really like to be able to address specifically that space. And so when I ask what are if you think about all the listeners who are out there trying to have the careers and lives of their dreams, and as it turns out, not that it was easy, not that it didn't have its hiccups, whatever, you really have built that for yourself. What would you tell them? What kind of would be the ultimate advice you would share with them on how to do this, and particularly if their career in life, what they wanted was to do it in the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, I think the thing that drives the nonprofit sector is the mission. So I think if you want to have a career in the nonprofit sector, you've got to have that commitment to the mission. For me, it was children, and has always been children. And so, and making, fulfilling this idea that children have some basic rights to an education and health and protection, and that's just the right thing, and that all kids should have that, no matter who they are, no matter where they come from, and what their family situation is, and who their parents are. And so I think you have to have that commitment and that passion. And if you have it, whether it's to animals or children or women or, a certain, or the environment. It can be to a lot of things, but I think you've got to have that personal passion, because they're not easy jobs, and they are, you could certainly make a lot more money, a lot of different, in many other places, and you can work a lot less hard. So it's certainly not about that. It really has to be about the commitment that you've got to that mission, whatever it is. So if you have that, then I think you can get into the field in a bunch of different ways. I think you could come in like I did, kind of more mid-career with a set of business skills. You can also, go into the Peace Corps or go into volunteer work when you're younger and build a career that way. But I think if it's really what you want to do, then there are ways to be able to do it, and you just have to decide it's what you want and that you're really passionate about it.
And you feel that there's 2 questions that I hear a lot. One is listeners are trying to figure out, could I actually make enough money to raise a family, not live luxuriously, but how bad is the pay? Really is the question.
How bad is it?
And then the other question is, do I feel the mission, even if I'm sitting in accounts payable, right? Like, does it, or if I'm just doing accounts payable, and not being in the field every day, then should I actually just go work in a bank where I do get maybe better benefits and a bigger paycheck?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, I think you can make a living. We have many, many people who work for Save the Children. Now, it's a big NGO, so, smaller nonprofits, probably a little bit harder, but larger nonprofits, I think people do work here and they make a living, and some of them are dual career families and some of them are not. Mm-hmm. It depends on what that living looks like, but I think you can absolutely do that. And I would say that even in our kind of back office or administrative functions, people are here because they believe in the mission. And it's up to the leaders of the organization to, make sure that people, no matter where you are in the organization, that you feel that you're part of it and that what you do, because everybody here contributes to, what we do for children. And they might not be out there every day in the field, but they still really contribute to what we do. I mean, we also try to give people an opportunity to go out and visit the work. So we actually have a fund that was funded by a donor that's specifically for our non-field people, and they can apply and they can go to the field with this donor funding. So we try to give people that experience both directly, and we do lots of showing people the work. And I talk about my trips every single month when we have a staff meeting. I will talk about where have I been and what did I see and who are the people that I met. So bringing that back to people. And now you have videos and all sorts of ways to bring the work to people. So I think it's important, even if you're doing a more administrative function, that it's super important that people feel that they contribute to the mission.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for being on the program. I happen to agree with you. I mean, I have lots of friends who work in nonprofits, and they are certainly making a living. It may not be the same scale, but as you say, they're often happier on an average day because they feel like they're making a positive difference in the world. So everything is about trade-offs and navigating and negotiating for what really matters to you. Thank you for what you're doing on behalf of children. Thank you for your time on behalf of women and girls and listeners. And you're an inspiration to all of us, Carolyn. So I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we really appreciate you taking this time.
Thank you, Perry. Great to be with you, and thanks for doing this.
You've been listening to Pivot Points, a series designed to help ambitious women have the careers and lives of their dreams. To hear more interviews, go to www.yourcareeryourterms.com. And be sure to tell us what you think. If there are topics you'd like covered or people you'd like interviewed,